Hello everyone, DMG or Jim here. Normally I'd be streaming right now, but my interweb is acting up, so this is a perfect time to go ahead and work on some videos. We're going to go ahead and continue our RTFM, read the frickin' manual. We're going to read the manual some more today. We're getting it into the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. My goal is to read through the book from cover to cover in 20 to 30 minute sections. Just really focus on reading what the information there, and then the last few minutes will just be a little bit of personal commentary. Practical application type things, personal advice. I'm going to try to minimize that because we got to understand this book is written for the new audience, the brand new DM, and some of the crusty old stuff that some of us 40-year veterans might be using may not apply anymore. So that's okay. But there are, some good stuff in here. So enough of me, blah, blah, blah. We're going to go ahead and get in here and start reading it. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Chapter 2, Part 2. We're getting into narration as our next section. We'll probably go through narration, maybe resolving outcomes in this section, but let's see. As has been advertised, we are just reading word for word, line for line, and we'll have a little bit of a commentary and discussion at the end of it, but hey, let's get into it. Narration. Using a few time-honored narrative techniques, you can immerse your players in your world and bring the game to life. Leading by example. When you roleplay and narrate with enthusiasm, you add energy to the game and draw your players into the world. Encourage the players to describe their characters' actions and incorporate their narration into your accounts of the characters' successes and failures. Brevity. Keep your description short and evocative. Focus on the more important information to keep players' interest and to highlight important clues and details. Players need to know about significant features their characters can perceive, especially things like monsters in a room, before they can decide what to do. Allow your players to ask follow-up questions and provide additional description as needed. Sorry, I got a cat in our lap here. Oh no, come back. You don't want to sit while we're chatting? Wow, Mr. Kitty. Oh, don't, no, you stepped on the keyboard. What the hell, Pecker? Sorry. Atmosphere. Bring a place to life by adding touches of atmosphere, such as lingering smells of ash, tiny beetles skittering across the dungeon floors, or blue flowers blossoming in the otherwise desolate and gloomy graveyard. Pick a couple of senses, sight, hearing, smell, touch, or taste, to highlight. Describe changes in the environment to direct your player's attention. For example, a bird alighting on a gravestone might draw the character's attention to it. Speaking of, draw your player's attention. Good narration invites the players to examine the details of the environment that lead to encounters or important information. Anything you describe with extra subtle details draws the player's attention. Give them just enough to invite further exploration, but don't create the equivalent of a flashing neon sign reading "This way to adventure." When using narration to guide your players, keep the following things in mind. Excuse me. Distinguish options. When presenting options to players, add details to distinguish the options. Should the characters take the left path or the right path? Perhaps the left path smells of rot and decay, while the faint sounds of lapping water come from the right. These details give players more information to make an informed decision without explicitly telling them where to go. Don't limit options. In general, let the players use the information they've been given to decide what they want to do. Don't put unnecessary limitations on the character's actions. That said, it can be helpful, especially with new players, to offer suggestions. You can go through the door, search a closet, or look down the shaft. Just make sure to finish by saying, or anything else you can think of. Don't assume character actions. Don't assume actions on the character's part. For example, don't say you step into the room and look up unless the player has already told you that's what their character is doing. The next section is going to be secrets and discovery for narration. In the course of an adventure, the players and their characters will uncover information that was previously unknown to them. Make sure the information they need to complete the adventure is obtainable. Don't hide important secrets or discoveries in places where the characters aren't likely to uncover them. Make sure they can't miss an important secret or discovery simply by failing an ability check, not talking to the right person, or not looking in the right place. See also perception in this chapter for more advice on hidden secrets in adventures. Giving information to one player. When one character separates from the rest of the group, it's usually okay to let the rest of the players know what happens, assuming the separated group will update the rest of the party when they're reunited. You might need to remind the other players that their characters aren't present, so they can't offer advice or information to the lone character. Sometimes, though, you'll want to give information to just one player. It might be information you think the character won't want to share with the rest of the party. Perhaps something related to elements of the character's history that are still secret. In this case, you can use one of the methods to deliver that information. Aside to the player, pull the player into another room, or have the player leave the room. This approach is best if there's a whole scene that plays out with just one character involved. Try to keep these scenes brief so that other players don't get bored or feel left out. Very important. Secret messages. If you have a simple piece of information to convey, you can whisper the player, pass a note to them, or send them a text or direct message. That's our section on narration. The next section we're going to read is resolving outcomes. This is a little bit more math mechanicals here. Remember, we're still in our basics mode, though. So resolving outcomes. You decide when a player makes a D20 test based on what the character is trying to do. Players shouldn't just roll ability checks without context. They should tell you what their characters are trying to achieve and make ability checks only if you ask them to. Big concept here. When a situation comes up and you're not sure how to adjudicate the rules, adjudicate the situation using the rules, use these 4 questions to help you decide. Number 1, is a D20 test warranted? If the task is trivial or impossible, don't bother with a D20 test. A character can still move across an empty room or drink from a flask without making a dexterity check, whereas no lucky die roll will allow a character with an ordinary bow to hit the moon with an arrow. Call for a D20 test only if there's a chance of both success and failure, and if there are meaningful consequences of failure. What kind of D20 test is the next question. If a character is actively trying to do something, use an ability check or an attack roll if the character is trying to hit something. If the character is reactively trying to avoid or resist something, use a saving throw. Which ability does the test use? Think about which ability has the most influence on a character's chance to succeed on the ability check or savings throw. Refer to the abilities check, and saving throw tables for guidance. Also consider whether a skill or tool proficiency might apply to an ability check. What's the DC? Based on how hard you think the task should be, set the DC as follows: 10 for an easy task, 15 for a moderately difficult task, or 20 for a hard task. The section that follows offers advice on how to use each kind of D20 test, when to apply advantage and disadvantage, and how to decide what the consequences or failure of successes should be. First, we have a little bit of a table if you're listening to us. It's labeled abilities, ability check, and saving throws. The left-hand column has our abilities, our attributes. The second column is a score measure, description of what does this score count for. The third column is make an ability check. When will we use this to do a skill or an attack? And the fourth one is make a savings throw too. When does this ability apply to a savings throw? So, the first ability is strength. This score measures physical might. You would use this score to make an ability check to lift, push, pull, or break something. You're in athletics checks or strength checks. Make a savings throw to physically resist direct force, being grappled, being knocked prone. Dexterity, ability. The score measures agility, reflex, and balance. You'll make an ability check to move quickly, nimbly, or quietly. You'd make a saving throw to dodge out of harm's way. Keep in mind, these are examples. These are not the be-all, end-all, okay? This is not a comprehensive list. The next ability is Constitution. Score measures health and stamina. Make an ability check to push your body beyond its normal limits. Make a saving throw to endure a toxic hazard. The next one is Intelligence. This score measures reasoning and memory. Make an ability check to figure out a puzzle or remember something. Make a savings throw to recognize an illusion as false. Wisdom is the next ability. This score measures perceptiveness and mental fortitude. Make an ability check to notice things in the environment or in creatures' behaviors. You would make a saving throw to resist a mental assault. And the last ability is Charisma. This score measures confidence, poise, and charm. You would use an ability check to influence, entertain, or deceive someone with charisma, and you would make a savings throw to assert your identity. So that's the difference between an ability check and a saving throw for each of the attributes. The next section is ability checks. We'll probably finish this section, narration and resolving outcomes, and get into the next little bit on the next video. So, An ability check is a test to see whether a character succeeds at a task the character has decided to attempt. The ability checks and saving throw tables summarizes what each ability is used for. Constitution checks are rare as a test of a character's endurance are usually passive or reactive, making a saving throw more appropriate. Proficiency. When the rules of a published adventure calls for an ability check, a skill or tool proficiency is often called out. For example, a character who succeeds on a DC 15 Intelligence Arcana check can puzzle out the magic that's involved. Sometimes rules allow for any one of two or more proficiencies to apply to a check. When deciding what check a character should make, be generous in determining if the character's proficiency bonus comes into play. You might specifically ask for an Intelligence Arcana check, or you can ask for an Intelligence check and let the players negotiate with you to try to see if one of the character's skills or tool proficiencies apply. Trying again. Sometimes a character fails an ability check and the player wants to try again. In many cases, failing an ability check makes it impossible to attempt the same thing again. For some tasks, however, the only consequence of failure is the time it takes to attempt the task again. For example, failing a dexterity check to pick a lock on a treasure chest doesn't mean the character can't try again, but each attempt might take a minute. If failure has no consequences and a character can try again, you can skip the ability check and just tell the player how long it takes. I call this trading time for rolls. Alternatively, you can call for a single ability check and use the result to determine how long it takes for the character to complete the task. Group checks. Group checks are a tool you can use when the party is trying to accomplish something together and the most skilled character can cover for characters who are less adept at the task. To make a group ability check, everyone in the group makes the ability check. If at least half the group succeeds, the whole group succeeds. Otherwise, the group fails. Group checks are not appropriate when one character's failure would spell disaster for the whole party, such as if the characters are creeping across a castle courtyard while not trying to alert the guards. In that case, one noisy character will draw the guards' attention, and there's not much that stealthier characters can do about it, so relying on individual checks makes more sense. Similarly, don't use a group check when a single successful check is sufficient, as is the case when finding a hidden compartment with a wisdom perception check. Consider using group checks in situations such as the following. A research task. The characters are trying to learn about an ancient prophecy from an archive. The characters can make a group intelligence investigation check to find some resources in the archive. Characters who are knowledgeable about such topics and about research methods in general can tell the others characters the most likely place to direct their search. If the group check is successful, the characters find enough different sources to paint a clear picture of the prophecy. Otherwise, their information is incomplete. The next example is roped together. The characters tied together as they scale a cliff or across a rickety rope bridge. If one or two characters fail their checks, the successful characters can stop their fall and prevent disaster. But if more than half the party fails, the whole group falls. You could also apply this idea to something like a long swim, where strong swimmers can help weaker ones. The next one is going to be social situations. One character offends someone at a diplomatic event, and a noble demands the adventurers be escorted from the premises. The characters can make a group charisma persuasion check to avoiding getting thrown out. They just need a few convincing arguments and the ability to smooth over any gaffes. You could apply the same principle to other charisma checks using deception, intimidation, or performance. Passive checks. Ability checks normally represent a character's active effort to accomplish something, but occasionally you need a passive measure of how good a character is at doing things. Passive perception is the most common example. See perception later in this chapter. You can extend the concept of passive ability check to other skills and abilities. For example, if your game features a lot of social interaction, you can record each character's passive insight score, calculated much the same way as passive perception. 10 plus all modifiers that normally would apply to a wisdom/insight check. The next type of resolving D20 test, we're still in that, is attack rolls. In combat, an attack roll is used to determine whether an attack hits. You can also use attack rolls to resolve non-combat activities that are similar to attacks in combat, such as an archery contest or a game of darts. Assign an armor class to the target, decide whether the character is proficient with the weapon used, then have the player make an attack roll. See degrees of success later in this chapter. Saving throws. In contrast to an ability check, a saving throw is an instant response to an effect, and it is almost never made by choice. A saving throw makes the most sense when something bad threatens a character and the character has a chance to avoid or resist it. Most of the time, a saving throw comes into play when an effect such as a spell, monster, ability, or trap calls for it, telling you what kind of saving throw is involved and providing a DC for it. In other situations that call for a saving throw, it's up to you to decide which ability score is involved. The abilities, ability check, and saving throw table that we talked about earlier offers suggestions. The next section is difficulty class. You establish the difficulty class for an ability check or a saving throw when a rule or an adventure does not give you one. Choose a DC from the typical DCs table based on the task's difficulty. Typical DCs. Task is very easy. The DC could be 5. Easy is 10. Moderate DC becomes 15. Hard becomes 20. Very hard becomes 25. And nearly impossible becomes 30. The task's difficulties are explained below. Very easy. Most people can accomplish a DC 5 task with little chance of failure. Unless circumstances are unusual, let characters succeed at such tasks without making a check. Easy, moderate, and hard. These are the most common difficulties, and you can run your game using only them. A character with a 10 in the associated ability and no proficiency will succeed as an easy task around 50% of the time. For a moderate task, a character needs either a higher score or proficiency to have a similar chance of success, whereas a hard task typically requires both to have a similar chance. If you can't decide between the two levels of difficulty, choose a DC somewhere in the middle, such as 17 or 18 for a task that is a little easier than hard. Very hard and nearly impossible. A DC 25 task is almost out of reach for low-level characters, but more reasonable after level 10 or so. Low-level characters have no chance to accomplish a DC 30 task, while a level 20 character with proficiency and a relevant ability score of 20 still needs a 19 or 20 on the die roll to succeed at a task of this difficulty. If you're setting the DC for a saving throw, don't go lower than 10 or higher than 20. If a creature is the source of the effect forcing a saving throw, use the standard formula for calculating a save DC. See this below. For some ability checks, calculated DCs, and most saving throws, the rules default to the following formula. The DC is going to equal 8 plus the ability modifier of the creature plus the proficiency bonus. Okay? This formula often sets the saving throw DC when a creature is casting a spell or using an ability, but it also apply to ability checks that are contests between two creatures. For example, if one creature is holding a door shut, use its strength modifier and proficiency bonus to set the DC for opening the door. When another creature tries to force the door open, the creature makes a strength athletics check against the DC. Another way to handle similar situations is to have one creature's ability check set the DC for another's check, a contested check. That's how hiding works, for example. A hiding creature's total stealth, dexterity stealth check set to the DC for wisdom perception checks made to find the hidden creature. The next section, this is a meaty section, advantage and disadvantage. Advantage and disadvantage are among the most useful tools in your toolbox. They reflect temporary circumstances that might affect the chances of a character succeeding at a task. Advantage is also a great way to reward a player who shows exceptional creativity in play. Characters often gain advantage or disadvantage through the use of special abilities, actions, spells, or other features of their classes or species. In other cases, you decide when a circumstance would merit advantage or disadvantage. As described in the player's handbook, if different circumstances would give both advantage and disadvantage in the same situation, the advantage and disadvantage cancel out regardless of how many circumstances would grant advantage or disadvantage. It's not too sorry. I'll comment at the end. Advantage. Consider getting advantage when circumstances not related to a character's own capabilities provide it with an edge. Some aspect of the environment improves the character's chances of success. A player shows exceptional creativity or cunning in attempting or describing a task. Previous actions, whether taken by the character making the attempt or some other creature, improve the chances of success. Disadvantage. Consider imposing disadvantage when circumstances hinder success in some way. Some aspect of the environment makes success less likely, or an element of the plan or description of the action makes success less likely. The next section is labeled consequences. This is our big point of our job. As a DM, you can use a variety of approaches when adjudicating successes and failures to tailor the game to your liking. Success at a cost. When a character fails a D20 test by only 1 or 2, you can offer to let the character succeed at the cost of a complication or hindrance. Such complications can run along any of the following lines. A character gets her sword past an enemy's defense and turns a near miss into hit, but then she drops the sword. A character narrowly escapes the full brunt of a fireball spell but has the prone condition. A character fails to intimidate a kobold prisoner, but the kobold reveals its secret anyway while shrieking at the top of its lungs, alerting other nearby monsters. By putting the choice of success at a cost in the player's hand and letting them choose the setbacks, you can give players more agency in crafting the story of their character's deeds. Degrees of failure. Sometimes a failed D20 test has different consequences depending on the degree of failure. For example, a character who fails to disarm a trapped chest might accidentally spring the trap if the check fails by 5 or more, whereas a lesser failure means a trap wasn't triggered during the botched disarm attempt. Consider adding similar distinctions to other checks. Perhaps a failed charisma persuasion check means a queen won't help, whereas a failure of 5 or more means that she throws the character in the dungeon for such a display of impudence. Degrees of success. A successful D20 test can have degrees of successes. For example, when characters participate in an archery contest, you might decide that the more an attack roll exceeds the target's AC, the higher the character's score. The archery target might have an AC of 11, but it has 5 concentric rings, indicating degrees of success. Should you decide that an attack roll of 11 or 12 lands in the outermost ring, a 13 or 14 hits the next ring closer to the center, a 15 or 16 hits the third ring, a 17 or 18 hits the fourth, and a 19 or higher will strike the bullseye. Critical success or failures. Rolling a 20 or a 1 on an ability check or saving throw doesn't normally have any special effects. However, you can take such an exceptional roll into an account when adjudicating the outcome. It's up to you to determine how this manifests in the game. One approach is to increase the impact of the success or failure. For example, rolling a 1 on a failed attempt to pick a lock might jam the lock, and rolling a 20 on a successful investigation check might reveal an extra clue. For attack rolls, the rules cover what happens on a natural 20. It's a critical hit or a natural 1. It always misses. Resist the temptation to add additional negative consequences to a natural 1 on an attack roll. The automatic failure is bad enough, and characters typically make so many attack rolls that they're bound to roll dozens of natural 1s over time. What might seem like an interesting consequence, like breaking the weapon used for attack, will quickly get tiresome. The next section is improvising damage. Forewarning, I'm going to have some comments on this one, this section at the end of the video. The improvising damage table gives guidelines for determining damage on the fly. Improvising damage. Damage goes up scaling by D10s. Oh, shit. I think I'm here. Yeah, I think I'm still here. Sorry, my monitor just crapped out my main monitor. Can you guys? Yeah. So anyway. Ooh. Thank you. Sorry about that. I messed up myself. So damage severity levels. The improvising damage table has damage on the left and examples. This is an escalating 1d10 system with examples. There is space here for nuance. So improvising damage. In 1d10, an example would be burned by coals, hit by a falling bookcase, pricked by a poisoned needle. 2d10, struck by lightning, stumbling into a fire pit. 4d10 damage, hit by falling rubble in a collapsing tunnel, tumbling into a vat of acid. 10d10 would be crushed by compacting walls, hit by whirling steel blades, or wading through lava. 18d10, submerged in lava or hit by a crashing flying fortress. 24d10, tumbling into a vortex on the elemental plane of fire, crushed in the jaws of a godlike creature or a moon-sized monster. The damage severity and level table is a guide to how deadly these damage amounts are for characters of different levels. Cross-reference a character's level with the damage being dealt to gauge the severity of the damage. Damage severity and levels. Character levels of 1 through 4. A nuisance would be 1d10, while a deadly damage would be 2d10. Characters of levels 5 through 10, you have a little bit more space. 2d10 would be nuisance, 4d10 is deadly. Characters of 11 to 16, a nuisance damage would be 4d10 damage, and deadly would be 10d10. Character levels of 17 through 20 can take 10d10 damage as a nuisance, but are going to be deadly at 18d10. Nuisance damage rarely poses a risk of death to the characters of the level shown, but a severely weakened character might be laid low by this damage. Deadly damage poses a significant threat to characters of the level shown and can potentially kill such a character that's missing many hit points. The next section is improvising answers. With a little preparation and a lot of flexibility, you can handle any curveball your players throw at you. One of the cornerstones of improvisational theater is called yes and. It's based on the idea that an actor takes whatever the other actors give and builds on that. A similar principle applies as you run sessions for your players. As often as possible, weave what the players give you into your stories. An equally important principle is no but. Sometimes characters can't do what their players want, but you can keep the game moving forward by offering an alternative. For example, imagine the characters are searching for a lich's lair. A player asks you if there's a mages guild operating in a nearby city, hoping to find records that mention the lich. This wasn't a possibility you anticipated, and you don't have anything prepared for it. One option is to say yes and use the tools at your disposal to create a suitable mages guild. By doing this, you reward the player for thinking creatively. Also, the guild can become a great source for adventuring hooks. Another option is to say no, but a solitary mage in town might possess the desired information. This approach rewards a creative player while demanding less work from you. Aids to improvisation. This is going to be a thick section. Oh, we're almost done with it. Yay, okay. When you need to make something up on the spot, say a mages guild in a town where you haven't previously planned for one, you have abundant resources to draw on within this book. A list of NPC names, or you need to have these things ready. A random table, list of NPC names, see non-player characters in Chapter 3. Random tables, such as the one in Settlement, see Chapter 3. A campaign journal in Chapter 5, and some maps, see Appendix B. So that's the end of what we're going to read today. We covered narration, we covered resolving outcomes in today's section. I'm going to do a quick little comment on a few of these things, and then we're going to get to the next section. Okay. Narration, some really good some good advice here, some good terms here. Number one, lead by example is huge. You're setting as the dungeon master at the table, you're setting the pace for play. You're setting the expectation. You're setting the baseline. The more engaged, the more immersed, the more entertaining, I dare say, that you can be, the more energy you're going to draw out of your party most of the time. Okay. But yeah, if you're low energy and disengaged, you can't expect your players to bring a lot to the table as well. Brevity. This is true. Let your players ask questions for prompts. Don't necessarily try to overload them with 3 paragraphs of information describing the holy temple of Helm sitting atop a hill. Let them ask the questions. Let them lead you, which will lead to brevity. Atmosphere. I'm a big believer in sensory. Not just what they see, what they hear, what they feel, what they smell, what they taste, the humidity in the air, the moisture, the gritty sound of the gravels crunching under their boots. Really build into the atmosphere to kind of let them feel the situation and prompt more questions from you. The next thing we're going to look at is the drawing the player's attention, distinguishing options, don't limiting options, don't assume a character's actions. These are all good. Let your players describe what they're doing, and if you want to embellish a tiny bit, do so. Don't reword what a character says into some big flowery situation, primarily because if you just kind of let them take the lead and add to it, you're going to help your players start building into more descriptive narration on their own. You don't want to always do it for them. Just minimize a little bit. And likewise, where it says don't limit options, yeah, it's exactly as it said there. Secrets and discovery, giving information to one player. Make sure if you are using this technique, it can be a fun technique, but make sure it's not the same player over and over. You shouldn't be playing favorites. Remember, going back to Chapter 1, talking about fair and equal time at the table. That can cause some player strife, and it can definitely divide up your time at the table. So you don't want to put players in spectator mode, and spending too much time on secrets and discovery can lead to that. So the D20 test is very, very interesting. The one thing I would like to remind you guys is the abilities checks, and saving throw table here. These are examples. This is not a comprehensive, exhaustive list. These are just the ideas. If you can make it close to this, then these will work, okay? Proficiency gets left out on your tools quite often. You should remind your players every once in a while, hey, check your tool proficiency. Sometimes you guys have tools. Your rogue's always going to remember, oh yeah, Thieves Tools, boss, I got you. Your cartographer might not remember that they have advantage on survival checks when navigating when they're using cartography tools, for example. There's a lot of creative things that can come through tool proficiency and all of that. Obviously, the try again, the group checks are a couple things. Trying again, it's okay if it's something that's not, for example, if they got to pick the lock to get through the door. The lock doesn't have a trap on it. There's nothing that's going to fall on their head. They keep failing the roll. You can trade time for the rolls, and it's okay. No one's going to get upset. That's something you can do to keep the pace of the game moving. Group checks, I agree with what they said here, especially in the change to stealth checks. One stealthy character shouldn't be able to make up for everyone else walking across the courtyard. Contrary to 2014's beliefs, I like that they're specifying that there's certain things that cannot be covered by a group check, so pay attention to that. Passive checks, we'll get into those here in a little bit. The attack rolls, I think it's really important here. Attack rolls are pretty, attack rolls, saving throws, difficulty class. This is all pretty self-explanatory. Nothing has really changed from 2014, or even honestly kind of 3.5 in regards to these ideas here. Advantage and disadvantage is a good thing. One thing that does pay in a mind here, they don't stack and they instantly cancel out. You don't have to do math. If I got 3 advantages and 1 disadvantage, it doesn't matter. They cancel out. Regardless of how many circumstances would grant advantage or grant disadvantage. We don't need to play well, I've got 3 cases of advantage, 4 cases of disadvantage, that equals disadvantage. No, it's done. The consequences for your actions, success at a cost. I would be cautious using this as a new DM. I think a lot of these things and the consequences are a little bit more homebrew table rules that a lot of people enjoy using, so they've included them here for consideration. I don't necessarily agree with the successes at a cost, especially if you're letting your players choose what the cost is. Degrees of failure, that is a mechanic in some of your stuff. For example, if you're dealing with a mummy and they do your frightful gaze at you and you fail your wisdom saving throw against frightened, again, DC 13 save of wisdom versus being frightened. If you fail by 5 or more, you're terrified and paralyzed until the mummy's next turn. There are examples of degrees of failure within the game. Critical success or failure, it is what it is there. A lot of players the DMs like the fumble idea here. I think it's very important that you remember that. We are attacking a lot in combat. That's one of the most often used die rolls in D&D 5e is our attack rolls. So if you're putting critical fumbles on that's going to happen quite a bit. Missing is bad enough, man. I agree with the critical failures and successes in regards to combat. I don't think we need to add a bunch of extra crap in there. It can be fun, but it's very difficult to be subjective and consistent when you go with a fumble table. My opinion on that. I agree with the writing here. I think there's enough. We're going to attack so many times that you're going to have a lot of bad stuff happen over the course of a campaign. So that's the end of improvising damage, improvising answers. Yes, the yes and no but. These are both valid techniques. There was a big push for a long time early in the D&D 2014 cycle that if you were to DM that said yes and, you were a bad DM. And the DMs that said yes and everything ended up with broken campaigns, imbalanced worlds, and not satisfying gameplay because yes and eventually leads to completely customized, completely overblown, poorly structured worlds. No but is just as effective because you're working within the rules of the game to still allow them to do something. No, you can't do a triple gainer backflip and shoot 3 arrows out of your bow as this action as you fall out of the window and make an athletics check. That breaks the action economy. But over the next 3 rounds, we can do this, this, and this to accomplish the same thing. That's in my opinion. I'm more of a no but than a yes and. Both approaches are valid, and ultimately you're going to end up using them both as you get better as a DM. So, hey man, that's oops, wrong button. That's chapter 2, the narration section and the resolving outcomes sections. We're moving right along here. Thank you so much for hanging out for this video. Plan on doing the whole book in 20 to 30 minute sections. This one did get a little bit long, so we're going to keep an eye on the timer. Next section is going to be running social interactions. I'll probably spend one video for each, running social interactions, running exploration, running combat as we go. So hey, thank you so much for hanging out. Hopefully you're enjoying the videos. We're going to knock out the whole book over this series. Likes, follows, subscribes are appreciated. Hit that that comment button if you have any questions. Obviously, feel free to join us over on Twitch when my internet's working, and you can jump into a live chat with us. But it's been a good time. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.